Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. This week I follow up with Steve Baker, the badass journalist embroiled in the January 6th prosecutions. He's walked straight over from the courthouse for a very tense, emotional conversation. You have to check this out. Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Steve, I guess it's good to see you. You've had a busy morning, but I want to catch up on your trial. You just literally came from the courthouse to this studio. But for context, for people that didn't see the episode that we taped around the end of June, published in early July, talking about your experience, remind people why you were in court this morning, and I want to get into what happened.
Yeah, I am in court, or was in court, and as you rightly said, I actually walked from the courthouse, the district courthouse, to your studio here, and I just left what was a hearing. It was supposed to be my trial date. It was supposed to begin today. And this is all related to January 6th. I was there covering the event. I acted and behaved as a journalist that day, as did some 80 to 100 other journalists who acted and behaved like journalists and went into restricted spaces, including inside the Capitol building, illegally, by the way. But because of the nature of selective prosecution, I and a very small handful of more right-leaning journalists have been charged, and some went through the trial process. I've had the opportunity for the last 3.5 years to watch these trials very closely in the same courthouse. I've attended them. I've covered them firsthand. I've seen that these trials really and truly are nothing more than what one of my attorneys calls a shaming exercise. And after my pretrial hearing last Wednesday, and recognizing from this judge the inflexibility, because they would not allow me to present my case. Every motion we ever made was denied, including the discovery that we were going to require of the government to show us why they handled 80 to 100 other journalists differently in their consideration about whether they should be charged or not. And because the judge denied us that discovery, I instructed my attorneys as soon as that hearing was over last Wednesday, no, I'm not going to do this. I am not going to subject myself to the shaming process. Furthermore, it's the Kobayashi Maru anyway. Sorry for the Star Trek reference, folks, but it's the no-win scenario. This judge has never acquitted anybody in a January 6th case, and he's judged over 100 of them, I think. So it was a no-win scenario, and there's just no sense in going through it. So I pled guilty today to all 4 charges, and the judge was not happy with the way I was pleading guilty because I would not acknowledge the core accusations of the government against me. Unfortunately, in the federal system, there is no such thing as a no contest plea. They do have what they call an Alford plea. Have you ever heard of that before?
No.
It's basically the same thing as a no contest plea. You're literally able to say to the court, I'm pleading guilty, but I'm not. I'm pleading guilty for the sake of expediency and to move this along to the next level, next phase of my life, but I'm not guilty. Well, you have to have the permission actually of the Attorney General's Office of the United States to even make an Alford plea. So we didn't have time for that in 1 week to make that application to the Attorney General's office, but it wouldn't have been offered to me anyway because I think maybe we mentioned this the last time we were on the air together. My particular judge, Judge Christopher Coover, the officiant at his wedding in 1999 was none other than Merrick Garland. So I don't think I would have been granted that opportunity.
So not fair and balanced.
No, it was not a fair and balanced trial or hearing at all. So I did plead guilty to all 4 charges. I'm only guilty of one of them. The Department of Justice always stacks charges, but they do that in non-January 6 cases as well. That's just their MO. Always overcharge, always stack charges, try to scare the defendant into a quick and easy plea deal, and then they move on to their next victim. That's what they've done in all of these cases. I was charged.
Do you have any idea what the plea deal would have been?
They did offer me one. They offered me the opportunity to plea out to the single charge of entering and remaining in a restricted space, the Capitol building. They offered me that. In the process of that offer, there was a deadline of my acceptance on that. And I think that deadline was back in the end of September. But we petitioned the government and said we would like to extend that deadline till we've exhausted all of our motions, because we were making motions for dismissal to have my case dismissed based on selective prosecution, which the judge denied us even the opportunity to present that case. So the final round of motions were not denied until my pretrial hearing last week. So then my attorney said, okay, well, then we'd like to discuss the plea offer, to which the government said that's been withdrawn. It expired. Well, wait a minute. We asked that it be extended until all of the motions were, concluded. And the judge just went, no, we're moving on to trial. See you next Tuesday.
I want to go, I want to cover the trial itself, because it's fascinating what happened to you. But I want to go back to something you said that is pretty fundamental here. The bias in the prosecution against some journalists versus other journalists. I think you said 80 journalists were there that day. Is that
80? But we actually submitted to the judge a list of 61 journalists. These are MSM journalists, mainstream media, large, New York Times, New Yorker, Washington Post, LA Times, all the way to uncredentialed podcasters, bloggers, social media influencers, which, by the way, are all considered media now by the DOJ and the FBI. That's true.
Yeah.
And only a very small handful, maybe this many, have been charged with entering that building. And they all have a political perspective right of the narrative, the approved narrative.
Yeah. Blatant. Not a one of the 80 to 100 that we now know, that the number is somewhere in that area, of those journalists who did, in fact, enter the building that day, who have a left of center political bent. None of those have been charged. Not a one. So before we get into your trial, I just want to recommend to everybody, if you didn't hear it, episode 288 with Steve, Denounce Violence, Defend Free Speech. It goes into fairly detail about your experience that day and the prosecution of you leading up to this moment. But tell us what happened in court today.
It was very interesting because, as I said, I notified my attorneys last week after the pretrial hearing that I was not going to put myself through that shaming exercise, and that I was going to plead guilty. If they weren't going to, if they had withdrawn the plea offer, then I was going to go ahead and just plead guilty, because I was going to be found guilty anyway, 100% chance. And so, rather than go through that, let's just get it over with and move on to the sentencing hearing, which would be scheduled months later. Plus, another thing happened the day before my pretrial hearing, which was on Wednesday of last week. There was an election.
So something happened, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And the winner of that election is on record multiple times during his campaign promising a pardon for, at the very least, the nonviolent J6 offenders. And I certainly fall in that category. My charges were all nonviolent misdemeanors. There's never been any accusation from the government.
Wow, committing journalism, sometimes that seems like a hate crime these days. But
well, it is.
Yeah.
At least it was, according to this judge. Yeah. And he said so today, pretty much. Not in so many words. But what happened today was I went in fully anticipating that I was going to plead guilty to things that I was not guilty of. And Matt, that was hard. I struggled up until not only the moment, but even after the judge said, Mr. Baker, do you understand the charges? Yes. Have you had anything to drink in the last 48 hours or done any drugs that would impair your ability to understand this? Nothing that would impair me, Your Honor. and
You were documenting martinis last night.
Yes, I was.
Yes.
I was taking a Twitter poll as to whether I should limit myself to 2 or just keep going. I kept going.
Medical martinis.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so I, faced with the exact questions of pleading guilty to purposefully, with intent to interrupt the function of government that day, I entered the building. That's how it was put. That's the nature of the charge.
Yeah.
Well, it's a lie. And in that moment, I couldn't do it. And I kept answering the judge in a different manner than he stated the question. And he said, that's not what I asked you. And about the 3rd time that I did that, he was getting really pissed. And I finally said, may I have a moment with my attorneys? And he went, yes. So we stepped off to the side, had a whispering conversation, and my lead attorney, he said, you're not confessing to a crime. He said, there's a difference in the law. You're not confessing. You're just pleading guilty to the charges as presented. He said, we'll deal with it outside with the press later. And then you'll be able to write about it. You'll be able to present your case in the court of public opinion. He said, just answer the judge's questions as he asks them. I said, okay. So I did. I effectively answered them to his satisfaction. And then he asked the clerk what the date would be for my sentencing hearing. And she said, Your Honor, that'll be March the 6th at 10 a.m. And he goes, okay, sentencing hearing is set for March the 6th at 10 a.m. And since that's likely not to happen, the judge actually said that, recognizing Trump's promise to pardon. This is a judge who is obviously very close to Merrick Garland himself.
Yeah.
And he said, recognizing that that's probably not going to happen, I'm going to go ahead and make my comments and my remarks that I would normally make to a defendant in the sentencing hearing, which he proceeded to then do.
Also acknowledging the political nature of the prosecutions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he did. And he proceeded to chastise me. Not all of those sentencing hearings are chastisements. Like, for instance,
And you've been to them.
oh yeah, no, yeah. I've attended them, and some of these sentencing hearings are. Oh, I mean, sometimes the judge dresses them down, and sometimes with all appropriateness. They're some of these people behave very badly, and have shown no remorse for their behavior. Some people, like Zachary Alam last week in his sentencing hearing, he demanded of the court to let him out because he was going to be pardoned by President Trump, and then he demanded reparations for recompense for what he's had to suffer. So there's guys like that, but
so you've been relatively well behaved so far.
Behaved. If a pen can misbehave, then I've misbehaved. And he chastised me for that. He chastised me for my work since January 6th in covering of these trials, in which I have referred to the weaponized Department of Justice and to the unfair nature of the court. And he dressed me down for that today.
So to understand his point, journalists are no longer allowed to criticize official government actions or question them in any way.
That was exactly the point that he was making. And then Matt, very oddly, I mean, defensively. Now, we had a journalist from The Blaze there today, so I'm sure she'll be covering it. And, of course, Washington Post was there, Associated Press was there, WUSA 9 court reporter was there in the courtroom. So I'll be interested to see how they report this. But he then went into an impassioned defense of his own judicial temperament and nature in this, and how reasonable he and the other judges have been, and considering each case and all of the evidence presented, on its own merits, and that the hardworking nature of the judges all the way down to the clerks. I mean, he was defending all of that. And in a sentencing hearing, which this wasn't, the judges do that, and then they try to get you to present some level of remorse. You have to do that, and I've watched that happen. I've watched defendants go in and cry in their sentencing hearings, weep, break down, say that they believed a lie, that the election was stolen, and it was the worst mistake I ever did, and I've listened to them blame President Trump for their behavior that day, that they believed his lies. So I've heard all of these people break down in this manner, or not all of them, but some of them in that manner, and then as I said, sometimes the judge doesn't dress down the defendant. Sometimes, because of their level of remorse, if it was genuine and sincere, the judges recognize that and said, and it gets to them. In fact, in the first Oath Keepers case, the defendant Ken Harrelson from Florida, Judge Amit Mehta actually said to Ken Harrelson in his sentencing hearing, he said, "Mr. Harrelson, I don't think that you're the man the government has made you out to be." So it doesn't always go badly. And in my case, because he honestly believes that there's going to be pardons, he decided to dress me down today.
Yeah. And typically that would happen at the sentencing hearing.
Correct.
And typically you would get a chance to respond to his charges, accusations, characterization of your behavior. And he did not allow you to do that today.
No. He didn't. Normally at a sentencing hearing, the defendant has the opportunity to make a statement, and basically with no time limit. I would have been able to make a 30-minute, I would have been able to nail my thesis to the Wittenberg door, figuratively, and I would have. And I'm going to anyway. You'll see that published on The Blaze today.
Yeah. Well, give us a summary right now.
Right.
Get it off your chest. You're still fired up from your hearing.
Yeah, no, I've got my 18 pages prepared statement, which I did not deliver in the press conference because it ended up being more of a Q&A, but I knew what I'd written, so I was able to answer some of those questions in that same manner. And I did. And I dressed down. I dressed down the Department of Justice, the court, Cooper himself. I dressed down the mainstream legacy media as well, because of their coverage of these cases, but which has been incredibly one-sided. I mean, one of the most stark examples is in any of these trials is the mainstream journalist will cover the prosecution's direct examination, but not cover the cross-examination from the defense attorneys. So you get all the accusations. You get all the juicy, details of what what they allegedly did, but you don't get to hear the cross-examination. When oftentimes the defense picked them apart, and I know that because I've sat in the media room with these journalists covering these cases and have read their stories that night or the next morning, and I'm like going, Did you cover the same trial I covered yesterday? And they needed to be dressed down. And then I got on my FBI agent as well. He was there today. I was really actually surprised he showed up. He works out of the Raleigh area field office.
Remind people who this is.
Craig Noyes, Special Agent Craig Noyes. He's always been very nice and friendly to me. But I developed an interesting relationship with him. I had a textual relationship with my FBI agent where I would taunt him. I would often taunt him, actually ask him, you see, this is an FBI badge upside down. This is from the Suspendables. This was made by the FBI, the guys that, the famous whistleblowers, Kyle Seraphin, Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle, et cetera, et cetera. And I was given an honorary membership into the Suspendables. And so I would taunt Agent Noyes to come over from the dark side, join the Suspendables. I would taunt him for pursuing misdemeanor offenders, something that the FBI never did. In over 100 years of its existence, it never dealt with misdemeanors. In fact, when they go through the academy at Quantico, one of the first things they're told in the first week of the academy is, we don't go after minnows, we go after the whales. And in over 100 years of its existence, it never so much as investigated a misdemeanor defendant until January 6th. And I just happened to also live in the same town as another one of those journalists who was charged, went to trial, convicted. Thank God his name's Stephen Horn. Thank God the judge had mercy on him and only gave him a year's probation for his sentence, $2,000 fine. But didn't put him in prison like J.D. Rivera from Pensacola, Florida, who was a photojournalist, videographer. He was the first person arrested in Florida. He was contracted by a mainstream television news station in Mobile, Alabama, to go up and cover January 6th. Well, when the story went inside the Capitol with his big gear, I mean, he wasn't doing this with a cell phone. He had his big professional gear with him. He went through into the Capitol like 80 to 100 other journalists did, and he was swatted, I think, less than a week later, over 20 agents, guns drawn, red dots on him, his wife, his children, and he had visiting family members at the time. He was charged with the same 4 nonviolent misdemeanors and swatted by 20 agents. He was not going to plead guilty in the manner that I did today. He said, I can't do it. I'm not going to plead guilty to something I did not do, especially under a selective prosecution scenario like this. Behaved himself 100% like a journalist, not even accused of anything. Not accused of chanting, never joined in singing, wasn't wearing political gear. 100% professional behavior that day. He went to a trial, bench trial, found guilty on all 4 misdemeanors, sentenced to 8 months in prison. The first 2 months he spent in solitary confinement. He was sentenced and placed in a medium security prison where, Matt, he was the only misdemeanor defendant in that prison. The only one.
Regular viewers of Kibbe on Liberty already know how obsessed I have been with the pandemic industrial complex and all of the stupid, authoritarian, and downright evil things that the government did to us during COVID-19. Well, I'm proud to announce a new investigative series that looks to get to the bottom of all of that. It's called The Cover-Up, and I'm producing it in cooperation with Blaze TV. The only place you're going to see this is Blaze TV, so go to FauciCoverup.com/Kibbe and use the code FauciLied for $30 off your annual subscription. Do it now. The truth is out there. I'm thinking of some of our favorite journalists, like Joe Scarborough, who went on these unhinged rants before the election about how he was, I'm characterizing here, but journalists like him were going to be under attack should Donald Trump become president. And it strikes me this is not unique to the Biden administration, certainly not unique to the Obama administration, but there seems to be an escalating nonchalance with which the federal government goes after independent journalists. And I wonder if it's about ultimately protecting legacy media, because legacy media basically, for all practical purposes, is an arm of government propaganda now. They're captured or something. I don't think it's partisan so much. I think it's driven by financial incentives and wanting regulators to protect them against what is obviously going to be the end of their monopoly on journalism, on truth. But this seems a whole new level.
Yeah.
But am I right? I know the Obama administration absolutely went after journalists that questioned. I'm sure the Trump administration did it as well, because it's become the new normal that they're going to use the power of the agencies to intimidate journalists, take away their First Amendment rights.
Look, they specifically were trying to throw a wet blanket over the First Amendment and over independent journalism in these prosecutions. Myself, Stephen Horn, J.D. Rivera, a couple of other guys.
That's why the swatting. It's
yes, absolutely.
It served no reasonable purpose.
Right.
It's to show people who's in charge.
And that's why the suspendables were born. There were FBI agents said, "No, I'm not going to do that. You told us we were only going to go after the whales." And Steve Friend refused to participate in that. He was being pulled off of child trafficking and child pornography cases to go SWAT misdemeanor January 6th defendants.
Yeah.
And he said, "No, that's not why I signed up." And he's faced the wrath of the government as a result of that. And so that's what I was doing with my FBI agent. I would taunt him about that. In fact, I wear as a badge of honor that in my pretrial restrictions from the government, that one of my pretrial restrictions is that I can't drunk text my FBI agent anymore. But I can talk about him here.
Yeah,
I just can't text him anymore.
We did do a sobriety test before you sat down in the
I'm
chair.
drinking coffee.
Yeah, and drinking coffee. All of this is fascinating to me, but I want to wonder what your judge had to get on the record that his cause was righteous and he did all the right things, and none of this was political. It was what needed to be done. I wonder what, depending on who it is and what the incoming Trump administration wants to accomplish, I wonder what we'll discover inside the DOJ.
I think that well, what we're hearing right now is that there's a lot of paper shredding going on.
No doubt.
Both physically and electronically. This is taking place. The bleach bit is, being bought by the gallons right now in the Department of Justice. One of the things that I mentioned in the presser after the hearing today was I was asked by my attorney, I think it was actually my attorney, to ask me to go public with the name of the person at the Capitol Police who demanded of the Department of Justice that they put me in prison. Now, it's like, wait a minute, what? Why would a Capitol Police personnel point me out? It's because of the stories that I've done on the Capitol Police. I've revealed perjury of federal officers in those trials in that same courthouse. I've also done stories of the corruption at the top level, and I have named names, and I've shown their disciplinary. I've gotten my hands on the paperwork of their disciplinary hearings. I've shown that these officers that committed what they call terminable offenses, they should have been fired. They should not have even been on duty on January 6th. And I showed the paperwork that they committed offenses that should have gotten them fired, but rather than being fired, Matt, they got promoted. And then I showed the process of how that works. It's not the crime you committed. It's what you know about what congressman is sleeping with who, where on their field trips. And you've got these dignitary protection detail officers that are traveling with them and see everything. They're the Praetorian Guard, and they know they know where all the skeletons are buried. And because of what they know, they can commit any crime they want, including embezzlement from the Capitol Police themselves, and then suddenly become the number 2 guy, the assistant chief, Sean Gallagher. I've called them by name. And because we have sources at the Department of Justice itself, I got a call one day after one of my stories, naming names, and I don't think everybody understands how this works with the January 6 cases, but the Capitol Police themselves actually have jurisdiction over all crimes that take place on the Capitol property. Okay, so all of these January 6 cases, technically, and it's a paper, shuffle, but they have to be referred by the Capitol Police, which means that they're going through the Chief Counsel's office. His name is Tad DeBias, a former assistant U.S. attorney, who I have also tweeted out and said, hey, Tad, when are you going to tell the American people why you were fired from the Department of Justice? So there ends up being a phone call made to the Department of Justice from Tad DeBias, and in a screaming match, a fit of rage, he, referring to me, said, "Put him in prison." So that was the referral from the United States Capitol Police. And this happened before I was ever arrested. It took them over 3 years. They didn't know what to do with me. The FBI interviewed me back in July. I'm sorry, they first contacted me in July of 21. They finally interviewed me in October of 21. They told me that they were going to charge me in November of 21. And then they went silent for 20 months. Didn't hear from them until I get a grand jury subpoena for my videos from January 6, which was completely unnecessary because they were all posted online anyway, and the FBI, I had offered those to them voluntarily. So it was a ridiculous exercise, but it did tell us that they were looking at me because they were trying to put a felony on me. Grand juries aren't seated for misdemeanor.
They're trying to shut you up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they knew what was coming. In fact, because I have the source in the DOJ here in D.C., I had been told long before about 4 months before my subpoena, that they knew what I was working on, and they were not happy.
Tell people, because you've now released a lot of this through Blaze TV, but not just your written journalism work, but you've produced 2 documentaries now, correct?
We have these mini documentaries that we're doing. One of them was that I'm enjoying quite. It's really delicious. It's the day in the life of Harry Dunn, former Capitol Police officer Harry Dunn, who not only perjured himself in Congress during the House Select Committee, January 6th Select Committee, he also perjured himself in trials, particularly the Oath Keepers trial, and then he published a book, which it should be in the fiction section, because his accounting of what he did on January 6th is completely negated by the Capitol CCTV video evidence.
And you poured through all of the videos after the Republicans took the majority in the House and they finally released them.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I had the opportunity, to my knowledge, still, and I may be wrong because I don't know everybody that's been in the CCTV viewing room, but to my knowledge, as a journalist, I've had more access to that video than any other journalist has, and I've at least availed myself of the opportunity more than anybody else has. It's still available if you want to get access to it.
So a day in the life of Harry Dunn is available on Blaze TV. Is it still behind the paywall?
No, it's actually on YouTube as well.
Okay.
So we have the first 2 parts out, but we have some ancillary mini documentaries on Harry Dunn as well, because he famously he rose to fame because of his claim that he was chanted at with the N-word by 20, 30, 40, up to 50 people. He was very specific about where it happened and when it happened. Nope.
He wasn't there.
It didn't happen.
Yeah.
So that was how he came to national prominence. That's how what ultimately led him to getting a presidential medal, congressional medal, being the hero of January 6th, when he was everything but. He spent most of the day hiding from protesters. And then when he was around them, he would lose his temper, which was kind of interesting because he actually taught as a 16. I think he'd been with the Capitol Police for about 13 years at the time, and one of the things that he did, he was what they call a personal training officer, is he taught de-escalation procedures, and he did everything except de-escalation that day.
Yeah.
But we have that story. We have ancillary stories on Dunn. We also have stories about Special Agent David Lazarus, who was also perjured himself in the Oath Keepers trial. He was the guy who claimed that he saw the interaction of 4 Oath Keepers with Harry Dunn 3 or 4 times while he was rescuing Nancy Pelosi's staffers out of her office. Except, Matt, when that encounter between the Oath Keepers and Harry Dunn was happening, David Lazarus was a quarter of a mile away in one of the Senate office buildings by the video evidence. He lied. Wasn't there. But he still identified those Oath Keepers in trial. He said, yes, that's the 4 that I saw. No, he didn't. They were out of the building before he ever got back. He lied.
Is there any pathway to justice for these guys?
And when this administration turns over, I hope so. I hope that there will not only be justice for these guys who were perjured against and who served 4, 8, 12, 18 years or serving in prison right now because 2 federal officers lied. But they didn't just lie. This is where we go back to the paper shredder and the bleach bit.
Mm-hmm.
Is these perjuries were suborned. Dunn and Lazarus did not make this up on their own. This is a coordinated, suborned perjury. And they brought in a big dummy, and they brought in Nancy Pelosi's head of security. Both of them had extensive disciplinary records. Neither one of them should have even been on the force on January 6th because they both had committed terminable offenses as police officers. And somebody came and made them a deal.
An offer they couldn't refuse.
Yeah. And I would imagine some of those documents are being shredded right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we will see what happens. As far as I've seen, have there been any names floated as to who might be Trump's nominee for DOJ?
We've been hearing some ideas like that. Some of them have been even current, congressional members and senators. I haven't heard anything conclusive from Trump himself yet. I haven't heard him say this guy is going to be my nominee there yet. I know that they're looking at Kash Patel as possibly heading up the CIA or the FBI, and I have some thoughts on that maybe we'll get to later. But Kash is supposed to talk to me this week because I've actually reached out to him for sourcing on some January 6th related stories because he was there. He was at the DOD with.
Well, let's go there. Let's.
You want to go there for a moment?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there was obviously this controversy about whether Trump ordered the National Guard to be there prior to the riot. And Kash has been on the record for a long time, including in his book, saying, yes, that's exactly what happened, is that President Trump did, in fact, authorize as many as 10,000 National Guard troops to be present to protect the peace that day. And, of course, obviously, The story, as the story goes, that Mayor Bowser and Nancy Pelosi and so and so and so and so and so and so all denied the deployment of the Guard troops for the purpose of, or the reason given was they didn't like the optics of 10,000 troops being at the Capitol on January 6th. Well, we now know that that's not where that line came from. That line actually came from a teleconference call in the Pentagon between the generals that answered to Mark Milley at the time and the National Guard commanders. And it was the generals under the command of Mark Milley who said, we don't like the optics. And they turned down Police Chief Stephen Sund's request. He was panic demanding, get these guys over here. They were just blocks away. They could have been there in minutes and brought the whole thing to a conclusion much faster than they did. Chris Miller was the acting Secretary of Chief. If you probably recall, he was appointed by Trump just like, I think, a week after he lost the 2020 election, or was declared the loser, whatever you believe. And so as acting Secretary of Chief, he brought over with him or Secretary of Defense, rather. He brought over with him Kash Patel, who was basically his senior aide and assistant. So Kash knew everything that was going on. That's why Kash has a unique perspective about what was happening with the Guard at the time. The problem is that Chris Miller, in his own book, agreed that Trump authorized and that he himself approved of those National Guard troops being deployed. The unfortunate Inspector General report came out about a month ago. Now, this was from, this was from a transcripted interview before the House Select Committee under oath. Miller's statement turned on its head. He said he would not authorize under any circumstances, given the mindset of President Trump, to have command over 10,000 troops of any kind, National Guard or otherwise. So he contradicted, did a 180-degree turn, or let's just say his statements in a sworn testimony are different than what he gave in his book. Well, what I want to ask Kash is, which one is it? Makes a big difference about what happened that day. And I would imagine there's some more paperwork being shredded as a result of that as well.
Yeah. Any other predictions about you absolutely categorically predict that Trump will keep his promise on January 6th?
Well, look,
that's a joke.
Yeah,
I'm guessing you're hoping.
Yeah. Well, this goes back to our kind of mutually similar politics. Is that in 2016 I was #NeverTrump. I was also #NeverHillary. I voted for Gary Johnson. And to be honest, that was a reluctant vote as well. Johnson, he had his problems as well. And by 2020, though, after observing 4 years of a Trump administration, I had him scored about 50-50 on my Liberty card. That's about where I was. That's what I said. And I chose and endorsed Trump at that time. I made up a meme. It was the Hollywood Squares. The old Hollywood Squares thing, and I said, "I'll take Trump to block." Now that's not a rousing endorsement, but nevertheless, it indicated where I was. And so, is Trump absolutely? Am I confident that he's absolutely going to pardon the nonviolent J6ers? I can't be confident of anything until he actually does it. But I do know there is a lot of good people putting pressure on him to do that are very close to him. And I know one of them is Mike Johnson. I've had the opportunity to speak to Mike Johnson a couple of times. I know that he is in favor of this happening. There are other people in his inner circle on his legal team that are in favor of this happening. I won't name their names. But the let's just say I feel good about it.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a tipping point in the Trump campaign. I've talked about this extensively, where you had, people coming over from the left, formerly of the left, red-pilled by lockdowns and censorship and everything we've lived through for the last 4 years, that really changed the philosophical complexion of the Trump coalition. And it's the anti-authoritarians and Maha combined with, I think, maybe not MAGA activists, but maybe people that were there, hopefully learned something about these guys, about what they call the deep state, administrative state, the permanent political and administrative class that play by their own rules. And I'm still cautiously optimistic that that Trump 2.0 will take that stuff seriously, and he should, and he said he will. And you may remember this: the closest he's ever come to acknowledging a mistake of any kind was in the staffing of the first Trump administration. Right. And the way that he got he wouldn't use the word rolled, but the way that the permanent class were advising him, hire this guy, hire that guy. It doesn't seem they're doing it at this time.
Right.
So we'll see. Like some of the names that are being floated right now, I'm not too happy about, but it's the beginning of the process. And I never know, by the way, when a name is leaked.
Yeah.
Like, is that the neocons leaking that name, or is that actually the Trump advisors floating a trial balloon to see what happens? Who knows? But
yeah,
what I tell my fellow libertarians is I will always be cautiously optimistic. I will always advocate on behalf of the good things that can happen. And when bad things happen, I'm going to be first in line to say that's wrong and keep pushing, because I don't know what the other strategy is.
I have a couple of very key sources of mine who will not be named, but they are on Trump's transition team. And these are change agents. I mean, they are serious about it. And if they do get the appointments that they expect to happen, these individuals are going to be making those changes. And if they are stopped and thwarted in their efforts, they'll blow it up. They're not going to be happy.
Yeah. Well, optimistic. You had just an awful ordeal, but hopefully, I guess day one is the first day you might know. Right? So you got some more martinis to drink in the meantime.
I need a couple tonight, I'll apologize to you right now, Matt, if I've been a little bit, edgier than I was last time. I had a moment in the hearing today where I was shaking, but I was so mad, and it was that moment where I was realizing it set in. I'm about to plead guilty to something I did not do, just to get it over with. And having said that, I would be remiss if I allowed you to close this out without me saying something about these pardons. I've had a big change of heart on this. I have always been very critical of the overtly violent offenders, the people that did property damage, especially the ones who were overtly provocateurs in their behavior on January 6th. And there were some bad people. And I've always said, that day, I saw bad people doing bad things. I saw good people doing good things. I saw otherwise good people doing stupid things. That's a fair characterization of the entire group that day. And I have always been an advocate that the nonviolent, from the misdemeanor charges down all the way up to the ones that were convicted of seditious conspiracy, Stuart Rhodes, Enrique Tarrio, no violence. Didn't even go into the Capitol. One of them wasn't even in town. They need to be let go. They need to be pardoned. But I've always held back on those guys I saw swinging baseball bats at cops. But after what happened to me in my pretrial hearing last week, which was brutal, I saw the inflexibility of where we were going. I saw exactly how, by the denial of every motion that we made for the last 10 months, that they were railroading me into not, first of all, not being able to defend myself, and secondly, just setting me up for the 100% conviction rate. And I had an epiphany in that moment. And I went back to what John Adams did when he was defending the British soldiers after the Boston Massacre. And his passion plea that I would rather see 10 guilty men go free than one innocent man punished. And so I'm asking President Trump to do a blanket pardon of everyone that day, even the guys I really don't like, to heal the nation. And because there are people that have been convicted of serious felonies, that was never in their heart. There was never in their intention to do anything wrong that day. And I'd rather 100, 200, 300 guilty individuals who committed violence that day, broke property, I'd rather them go free than a single innocent person spend the rest of his life in prison for that day.
Gonna leave it there. Where do people find your work and your stuff at Blaze TV so that we can continue to follow this until the day of redemption?
Yeah, I am of course on X and Facebook. Everything, all of my online work is under @TPC4USA. Everybody always asks what that is. TPC was what my old blog was called, the Pragmatic Constitutionalist. So I'm still on Locals. I still have that on Local. So it's @TPC4USA. X, same thing, @TPC4USA. Facebook, the same. And then, of course, my work at the Blaze. And we have I've been given my own URL at the Blaze. It's theblaze.com/truth. I don't know how I lucked into that, but I appreciate the acknowledgement of the guys at the Blaze, and I want to thank them for standing by me through this entire process, because they've been amazing.
Yeah, they've been great. Well, thank you for doing this. Shitty day, but it's going to get better.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.